Let's be clear what's happening in this country. It's Nazism. Republicans are Nazis. You cannot separate yourselves from the bad white people.
Growing up in the 90s, I never thought much about race. Sure, you noticed, but never really seemed to matter that much, at least not to me.
Being a white, straight, cisgender man is the top of the pile.
I'm on the top of the pile. That's me. Am I racist?
I would really appreciate it if you left.
I'm trying to learn. I'm on this journey.
Can you please leave?
If I'm going to sort this out, I need to go deeper undercover. If I want to be an ally, I need to look like one.
What is racism?
Martin Luther King said not to judge people by the...
Martin Luther King said a lot of stuff.
Is America inherently racist?
What the hell is that?
The word inherent is challenging there. America is racist to its bones. All of the...
So inherently.
Yeah.
The entire system has to burn. And I'm not going to even use save this country. This country is not worth saving. This country is a piece of shit.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
They gon' say I'm racist.
Joining us now is Matt, certified DEI expert.
Here's my certification. Where are you guys on your anti-racist journeys? So I'll look around the room and point to who we believe is the most racist person in the room. We want to rename the George Washington Monument to the George Floyd Monument. Would you mind signing it? You will? What do you think about this issue of heteronormativity and how it intersects with the broader structures of racism in society?
They gon' say I'm racist.
What's up with white people? What are you doing to decenter your whiteness?
Who's making it the center? Why are they doing that?
And what you're doing is you're stretching out of your whiteness. This is more for you in this field. White.
Folks.
White.
Trash. White supremacy.
White woman.
White boy.
White.
Entitlement.
White.
Centering.
White.
Silence.
Is there a black person around here?
So there's a black person right here. Does he not exist?
They gon' say I'm racist. But they call everybody racist.
Hi, Robin.
Hi. And what's your name?
I'm Matt.
Matt. Hi, Matt.
Nice to meet you.
I just had to ask who you are because you have to be careful.
Never be too careful.
They gon' say you racist. But they call everybody racist.
Please welcome Kevin Roberts and Matt Walsh.
Yeah, it feels good. Sounds good. Feels fine. Matt Walsh, welcome to the Heritage Foundation.
Thanks for having me. This is great. Really appreciate it.
We're really excited about this. Great job with the movie, even though no quote-unquote mainstream critic wants to review it, right?
Yeah, you know, I don't know if we're the first top 5 box office widely released film to get 0 mainstream critic reviews, but I don't know if we're the first, but it's certainly not common as far as I know. So we're used to, of course, with the conservative films, you're used to the dynamic where you have like the 90% audience score and like a 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. But for us, it's interesting because it's 99% audience score and no score from the critics whatsoever. So
It's almost as if whether it's your film or say certain public policy and personnel projects that a certain organization might take on, that the more the other side tries to say it's outside the mainstream, the more that's evidence that the everyday American loves it.
Yeah, I think you're right. Especially, it's also evidence of the media's. They don't have the same power anymore to shape people's tastes and what they're interested in and what they and the kinds of things they have access to. Because if we had done this 20 years ago, I know this particular film wouldn't have made sense 20 years ago because this DEI crap didn't exist. But without social media, and especially without Twitter in particular, if the corporate media decided they're not going to acknowledge your film, then basically it's like it doesn't exist. I mean, they'd have the power to just completely shut it out, which they don't have anymore because you can go around them. It's difficult, it's an obstacle, but it is something that can be traversed.
And we're going to get into the film specifically and some of its success just, less than a week into it. But it seems as if on this last point that you make, that the powers that be, whether they're people in the media, corporate media types, or politicians, they've not come to accept the new reality, which is that they don't matter as much anymore.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. I mean, well, it's a hard thing to accept, I guess, when you become increasingly irrelevant. And there's a certain power that they had over society that they don't anymore. Although it's not, they still have a lot of power, you know, and they still have a lot of power to set narratives. And, you know, we see that all the time. But I think that the narratives don't have quite the same sticking power much of the time. And we've seen this with, you know, for example, look at what they did with Kamala Harris, where for about a month, they turned her into this political sensation, even though she'd never done anything. You know, the last time she ran for office, of course, she got 1% or whatever it was. Nobody was interested. And then for about a month, they were able to like turn her into this, build all this hype around her. But even that, it starts to wear off because like the reality eventually peeks through, and they don't have as much control over that or as much ability to prevent that from happening.
We'll come back to that point, the sort of larger point about what we do with that, because one of the things that we try to do at Heritage generally, and I try to draw out in conversations I have with great Americans on this show, is what we do in terms of next steps, homework assignments and so on, which you're great about, and all of the things that you do. But let's talk about the success of the film thus far, in spite of all these kind of structural obstacles to it that people have placed in front of it intentionally. Great opening weekend. We're just days into it, but give us top line figures on how it's doing.
Yeah, we're top 5 in the box office, with number 4 in our opening weekend. And that is, you know, we're competing against films that pretty much all the other films in the top 10 had at least 1,000 more screens than we did, sometimes 2 or 3 times the number of screens. We had, you know, we actually beat one major Hollywood new release that came out the same weekend, I think called The Killer's Game. And they had 1,000 more screens, you know, tens of millions in marketing budget that we don't have. So we were quite happy about that. We came in at $4.7 million around there at the box office on a $3 million production budget. So we were happy about that as well. And now now the game is, can you maintain it? Because that's really, you know, it's hard to get a movie into theaters. It's hard to get into the box office at all. And then it's even harder to maintain that for any amount of time. So we'll see what happens in the coming weeks. But we did add some screens for this coming weekend, which is a good sign. And we're relying a lot on word of mouth, because we don't have, you know, a lot of these Hollywood films, typically it's you spend twice your production budget on marketing. So, you know, you do the math. If you have a Hollywood film that was $70 million to make, well, you look at the amount of marketing they're putting into that, and we don't have $100 million, $140 million to spend on marketing, which is a real challenge, because of course the marketing and this is what Hollywood does with their movies, they just pound it into your head, and because they want it to be top of mind, and so that if they stop somebody on the street and they ask what movies are coming out this weekend, they want you to be able to say their movie. But to get to a critical mass of people who can recall your movie that quick, it takes a lot of marketing that we don't have. So that means that we're relying more on word of mouth, which can be really powerful and potent. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and we're glad at Heritage play a tiny, small role in that. But first homework assignment for people, my colleagues and friends in the audience in person, and thank you all for being here, as well as people who are tuning in, is go watch the movie, go buy the tickets, go be present in the theater. So much of winning in the public square, as you sometimes talk about, Matt, is just being present. And winning in the public square isn't just about brass knuckle politics and policy. It's about these cultural phenomena like your movie, Am I Racist? And hopefully what we can do is take the angst, the concern that we sometimes get on the political right when we want to boycott things. Like when we had really good reason to boycott that terrible drink, not even a beer, called Bud Light. And we really got animated and activated. I mean, it really is awful beer. It's good in college because it was cheap, but Well, we'll leave that story aside. The point is, we need to take that energy and go do something positive. And the best positive thing we can do today, this week, this weekend, is go watch your movie.
Well,
I know you're going to say yes.
I agree. Amen and ditto to that. Yeah.
What was there a moment in your creative mind when you said, this movie has got to happen?
Well, I guess the first moment was after we made our first film, What is a Woman? And I guess seeing the kind of impact that if a film can have on the culture, because prior to that point, I had, my day job is podcasting, commentating, and I think that there's value to that in the culture. I certainly hope there is, because I still what I do every day. But most of that, these days especially, is you're chasing the news cycle. And so stuff happens in the news, you do your show, you offer your commentary, you write things on social media, and then tomorrow it's another thing, and we're talking, nobody cares what you said yesterday, now we're starting all over again. So then to make a film that, first of all, you're spending more than a day creating it. You're putting time and effort into something, into a piece, into something that you then put out in the world. And for it to have an impact that lasts longer than a day, it was revelatory for me, because it was the first time I had done that. And so once we saw the impact that had, I certainly knew that, well, we have to do this again. And we had figured out with What is a Woman, it's a different film in a lot of ways, but similar in the sense that we're tackling obviously a hot button cultural issue, and we want to get the so-called experts, the people on their high perches in their ivory towers, and kind of, because that's where they like to be, and they're very insulated up there, and they don't have to withstand any scrutiny or skepticism, and yet they exercise all this power and control over the culture from that position. And so with What is a Woman, we figured out a way to we can kind of lure them out into the open and just provide them an opportunity to expose themselves for the frauds that they are. And once we figured out kind of how to do that, we realized that, well, there's a lot of other areas in the culture where this method could be useful. But I guess our first real moment of kind of inspiration for this was just thinking of a slightly different strategy for it, because What is a Woman? It was I'm asking a question, I'm very skeptical pretty much the whole way through until we get to the end. And this one, we thought it'd be interesting if we start with questions like the other film, but rather than being skeptical, I'm going to believe whatever nonsense they tell me. And almost like I was talking to someone earlier, it's almost like an improv yes and sort of thing. So we'll do that. I'll ask the questions, you'll give me an answer, and I'll say, oh, okay, well, great, I believe it. So therefore, if that's the case, then what about this? And okay, well, if that's true, then what about this? And we want them to sort of guide me down the rabbit hole. And we wanted to create this kind of a film that feels like it's building and building and building and getting weirder and crazier and in many ways more disturbing until we see where this thing takes you if you take it seriously and if you believe it. And that was kind of the idea behind the movie.
How hard was it, as some of these folks are very seriously on their part taking you down that rabbit hole, to remain serious?
Not as hard as you would think. I get the question a lot, how do you keep a straight face?
I had this problem when I was sitting in faculty senate meetings. So
I can only
these
imagine.
People actually believe this stuff.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Keeping a straight face, I mean, it helps that I'm an emotionless sociopath. So
that's what I gathered.
That's the secret sauce. But also aside from that, when you're in the room with these people, I mean, in the movie, of course, we take everything, we edited together to make a film. But in real time, I'm spending hours in the room with these people. Robin DiAngelo, for example, was over 2 hours talking to her. And when you're actually sitting there in the room with these people listening to all this nonsense, it's not very funny in the moment. And if anything, what I want to do, my instinct is not to laugh, but more to argue with them. And that's why it was, in both films, we had our director, Justin Folk, on both films, great film director. And he was the one who oftentimes would have to pull me back because I would say to him, like, I can't do this anymore. Give me another person, and I just want to go in there and yell at them. Because I can't sit there and I can't even pretend to agree. To even pretend that I agree it's revolting to me. I feel wrong doing it. But his point was always this is much more effective to we don't need you arguing with them. That we have that on the podcast every day. This is a film, not a podcast. So it's much more effective to let them do it. And so that was the thing that I had to. That was always the struggle. Was not yelling.
It had to be hard. I mean, I've got these ideas as a bit of a practical joker. I won't mention them all, but I'm thinking April Fool's Day next year, we might send Mike Gonzalez, who's a great colleague here who works to correct the nonsense of DEI, over to testify in Congress in favor of it as a card-carrying member of some DEI organization. I haven't mentioned that to Mike yet, but I suspect if I asked his colleagues who are in the room, raise your hand, how many of you think that's a great idea? Great joke. Oh, there he is. Mike is saying, no, don't do that. But it leads me to say, we might still do that. It leads me to say, using humor is really important for us. Yeah. And for those of us who are in the public policy world, especially in this year when there's so much at stake, we're not making fun of that. But it's really important to tap into that emotion of humor to realize how absurd the other side is. We're no longer talking about different taxation regimes. We're no longer talking about different regulatory regimes. We're talking about utter and total nonsense that at its philosophical foundation is pretty anti-human. But humor is really important in order to provide some perspective.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think that humor is very disarming to people.
That wasn't a Hezbollah pager, was it?
No.
So I wanted to get a little distance just in case.
Yeah. That's, let's hope not. I don't know if they've set the phones up to do the same thing. I might be in trouble. Anyway, humor is very disarming to people, and it's also a universal. Humor is it's universal. If something's funny, it's funny, and so it's a way of getting people. That's why this film, even the last film, it doesn't really have to be. It's not political in the sense of you have to be a Republican to enjoy it. I've gotten many messages from liberals and Democrats who are distraught that they have to admit that they enjoyed the film, and I think that it's just because there's stuff in the movie that's funny, and if it makes you laugh, it's just that's what it does. It's almost for most people who are not emotionalist sociopaths, it's a natural human reaction, and I think that there's a real opportunity here because the left has mostly abandoned humor, has mostly given up on it. And that's a relatively recent development. And in particular, political and satirical humor. I mean, they still try to do it, but they're not good at it anymore. And I think one of the reasons they're not good at it is that they're so angry at the people that they're trying to mock that it's just not as funny. Because anger isn't, some of them, sometimes when they get very angry, it is funny, and you laugh at them. But when you approach humor that way, and it's just vicious, it loses, I think, a lot of what makes humor funny. So what that means is that there's an opportunity, I think, for conservatives to come in and fill in the gap and say, okay, well, if you guys aren't going to do this, then we'll do it. And we're starting to see, I think, more and more of that, and I think it's a really positive development.
I do too. I mean, I think here in DC about so many institutions or customs that are good. I mean, maybe they're sort of pointless now, like the White House Correspondence Dinner, this sort of prom for legacy media. But it used to be, not even when I was a child, but even as a young adult, where both sides, it didn't matter which party was in control of the White House, could poke good, honest fun that was just funny about the other side. But now it's become a forum for really vicious attacks. It's not humor at all. And we can maybe on the political right, because we're so driven by rational thought and data, decry that. And we could maybe propose solutions to that. But what I hear you saying, whether it's about that example or another, is use humor and take advantage of the opportunity that has been given us by an increasingly humorless left. And what I love about that, in addition to it being true and kind of fun, is it really puts politics and policy in perspective at a time when the average American is not only looking for a normal country, but understanding that part of waking up in a normal country is that you laugh every day, because not everything is that damn serious.
Yeah, well said. I mean, humor and also, filmmaking in general, art. I'm not, our film, Am I Racist? It's not, I'm not saying it's some kind of artistic masterpiece, work of staggering genius, but it's a film, and film is an art form. And using that, figuring out how to use art to get your message across is also something that I think historically, at least for the last several decades, conservatives have not been very good at. And I think I also see that might be changing now. And it's not just us, it's Angel Studios and others who are putting out films that don't make the mistake that maybe so-called Christian films in the past have made, where the story and the quality of the film is secondary to the message, right? And because when you do that and you say, well, as long as I get the message across, I don't really care about the other stuff. But when you do that, it's a bad film. So then you're also not getting the message across. And so you got to kind of flip that on its head. And that's another area where the left is now making the mistakes that conservatives used to make, because that's one of the reasons we talk about how Hollywood is so woke now and nobody wants to watch the movies, and it's because they're making the same mistake now. Now they're making movies where, as long as the message is there for them, as long as they're virtue signaling and they got all that diversity and representation, as long as they have that, it's like, let's put that first, and then we'll worry about making a good movie. And then you see what you see now, which is that a lot of these movies are bombing at the box office. So sort of a question about practicality, a question about advice for people in the audience, people who aren't podcasters and not two-time filmmakers. How do they participate in pushing back against the DEI industry? I mean, for us at Heritage, we at least understand our role as an institution, which is the policy, blocking and tackling, the messaging and so on. But I'm really asking for people who are everyday Americans, have different kinds of jobs. They want to spend a few hours a week or a month saying, man, I'm really inspired by Matt's work with Am I Racist? Or What is a Woman? What can I do practically in my community or state to be part of a movement that ends that nonsense? What would you say to them? I mean, I think that, and I get that kind of question a lot, and
you don't look excited about positing a solution.
Well, because I get it so often that you think I have a good answer by now, and
we were kind of banking on one, Matt, just to be.
Well, because I'll tell you what it is, because the answer is so simple that it's just like it's like, why even say it? It sounds like a cop-out, I guess. But for most people, maybe it's not the answer, but the best thing you can do in your everyday life is, when you encounter this kind of nonsense, to just speak up against it. Like, just say something. If you see something, say something, as they say. Except apply that not to terrorism, but to left-wing lunacy.
Which is a terrorism in its own way.
And right. And if people would just do that, like if everybody who knows that this stuff is wrong would just say that and operate in their daily life as though they know it's wrong, then I think a lot of this stuff goes away. And that really became clear to me when we made the first film, What is a Woman? And I can remember we would go, of course, we talked to the crazy, gender doctors and everything, the people that are pushing this and doing horrible things to kids. But then we also went and talked to normal people on the street, did these like man on the street interviews. And at the time, this was 3-4 years ago, we were filming this. And we would ask, and we went to 6 or 7 different cities, and we would ask people just these basic questions like, what is a woman? Should men be allowed in the women's locker room? Should boys compete against girls in sports? Is it possible for a man to become a woman? Like those kinds of questions. And at the time, almost everyone we talked to, demographics didn't matter, white, black, old, young, didn't matter, man, woman, almost everyone we talked to gave the wrong answers to those questions. But you knew they didn't believe it. Like they're kind of glancing nervously at the camera and then saying the things that they think they're supposed to say. And it was frustrating for me because I'm like, you know this isn't, of course a man doesn't belong in the women's locker room. Like we all know that. And you know that, but you're telling me otherwise. Now the thing is that I think that the page has kind of turned in large part on the gender issue, not completely, but I think culturally we're winning. We've been winning that battle. And so if I were to go back now to those same cities and ask those same questions to the same number of people, I think I'd find a lot more people who are willing to say, oh, a woman's a female. No, a man doesn't belong in the women's. What are you talking about? No, of course, boys don't belong on the girls' team. I think I'd find a lot more people willing to say that now than I was at the time. And that just shows you the power of just when like normal people are willing to say what they know to be true, it starts turning the wheels of the culture. And this stuff is not sustainable anymore. Like this stuff is so crazy, it's only sustainable if millions of people who know better go along with it because they're afraid of the social consequences of speaking up.
And it goes back to your point, which I know you're serious about, but delivered with a little bit of jest, that it's so simple you feel like it's a cop-out, which is just to speak up. Yeah. But it shows.
I got around to a good answer on that. Eventually, didn't I?
I'd give you like at least an A-.
Okay, I would have said B-, but I'll take an A.
Yeah, great inflation. It's the social pressure. Right. Yeah, sitting here with you. What was I even going to ask you? Oh, it's not a cop-out because the left has succeeded in institutionalizing this Orwellian pressure about silence. They don't even need just the federal government to be in collusion with big tech to do that. There's just this social pressure that exudes from people in power and institutions. I'm thinking about professors, I'm thinking about teachers and so on. You obviously portray this well in your film. But speaking up is vital, and it seems as if that people need touchstones. They need examples to send to folks, not just white papers, no disrespect to any of us who work in that, but clips from your film, clips from your show. And it seems as if as the political right is maturing, not just in policy and politics, which it's doing, but also in the creative arts, that we've got to give our people more intellectual ammunition in order to do that. How confident are you that the political center right or the normal movement of common Americans is going to be able to do that in time, not just to arrest the terrible consequences of DEI, but to make this republic normal again?
Well, it depends on what you mean by in time. In time for what? Like, so when you say in time, what do you mean?
I mean both political consequences, so elections, but in time that people ultimately don't give up hope. Yeah. That whether it's this year or 2029 or 2033, that the country's too far gone. Because that's what I hear as I travel the country.
Yeah, I think the answer is that it's going to take, it took generations to get to where we are culturally. The kind of cultural decay that we all, at least everyone in this room, notices and is fighting against. It took us generations to get here, so I think we would be naive and foolish to think that we can turn it around in a couple of years. It's going to take generations to get out, and ultimately it does come down to have kids, raise your kids well. They have kids, they raise their kids well, and over the course of generations, we claw our way out of it. And I don't. So it's a longer period of time. And when I say that, I think people often respond like it's a defeatist or depressing answer. I don't think it is, because I'm okay with thinking that, okay, well, the culture that I live in is decadent and degenerate and horrible in so many ways. And it's going to be basically like that until I die.
I love your optimism.
Right. But, well, the optimism is this, is that maybe it'll be different for my kids. And maybe it'll be different for my grandkids. And so there's a simplicity in that for me, because it means that, well, my role is to fight this thing out. That's what I'm going to do until I'm dead, and that's the role that we all have. So that's all we're going to be doing. Is when we say culture war, it's not a hot war. It's not. We don't mean that in a physical sense, but it is still a war in every other sense, and a spiritual war, I think, most of all. And so we're going to be in it until we're dead, and that's it. And so just settle in and accept that. Even try to have some fun with it if you can every once in a while. That goes back to the humor we talked about. But we're building something for the future, and I think we've lost in our culture. We've lost a lot of things, but we've lost a sense of permanence and of time that stretches beyond just what we can see in front of our faces. People used to care more about that. I mean, people used to think about leaving a legacy that lasts 500 years, and I think we just need to expand our view, expand our scope in that way going forward.
There's a certain calm that one has when you recognize that this cultural change, the figurative war of the culture war, is going to take 2 or 3 generations at least to turn around, because it makes you realize that it may not all be okay, but we can't be so selfish either as individuals or in a particular generation to think that everything is going to be won or lost in our generation. A couple of things about that. The first is, you're not, I gather, arguing for full Benedict option. That's a question we often ask ourselves internally at Heritage if policy things are going poorly and so on, as much as you're saying having that sort of high-level attitude puts in perspective the day-to-day tactical behavior, especially for us in politics and policy. But the politics and policy aren't the end-all, be-all. And the powers that be in Washington don't want us to have that perspective, because they really would prefer, and this is across the political spectrum, they really prefer us to be exclusively focused on the months in front of us. They're important. And the outcome of elections, of course, the outcomes of elections are very important. But we would agree with you, for what it's worth, at Heritage, that also having that long-term approach gives you some perspective and maybe keeps you a little more joyful. And I think that's crucial.
Yeah, and if you're not expecting, it's a lot more depressing and despair-inducing, I think, if you're expecting that by next week things will be fixed, because then next week comes and they're not. And it's very defeating. But when you realize that this is a longer game than that, it also makes you a little bit less panicked. People talk about elections even. The next coming election is very, very important, extremely important. I think if Kamala wins that, it's going to be quite disastrous for America in a lot of ways. But if that were to happen, America's still going to exist. I mean, we're still all going to be here. I'm not moving. I don't know. There's nowhere to go. And so the fight will continue even in that case. And the reality also is that you're going to lose elections. There's not a scenario where, right, we're not going to win every election from now until we're all dead. It just won't happen. So there's going to be losses. It's baked into the cake, really. And if you if you just take that long-term view, you take the short term seriously, but you realize that, okay, you land a blow or you take one, but the fight continues.
The second thing, thank you for that. The second thing that occurs to me about your comment is that there's such a strong correlation between the lack of this longer view and having the calm and resolve that comes from that, and the seemingly accelerating decline in religiosity, in religious practice in the United States. And that's not something that is exclusive to the political left. It's something that we're seeing across the ideological spectrum. We're seeing it across every other kind of demographic that I'm aware of. What's the future of that trend of the decline in religiosity in this country?
Yeah, I have a little bit more of a depressing view of that.
Oh shoot! I was just searching for some optimism here.
Well, I just think that the trends there are rather startling and stark. And that's another one. Well, ultimately, it's not depressing because, again, it goes back to it's a generational struggle. But that one is, I think that, you know, as you say, religiosity is declining, faith in God is declining, secularism, atheism are increasing. Church attendance just was dropping off a cliff, and then COVID, and then it basically almost hit the bottom for a lot of churches. And I think that's going to continue in the short term. I don't think anything's going to happen to turn that around. I mean, even a lot of conservatives these days are conservative politically in almost every way, but religion's just, if you ask them, they'll say religion's not a part of their life, you know, that kind of thing. But that goes back to that even more is that a generational thing where, well, I have 6 kids, so the best thing that I can personally do to turn that around is to raise my kids in the faith, going to church, realizing the importance of faith. And that's what we all need to do. And once again, you know, like check back in 50 years. I think we'll be in a better spot then. But in the meantime, you bring up, not to change the subject, but it's related. You bring up the decline of religion. That's another thing that I noticed making this movie, because I was trying to understand, okay, the grifters, the DEI grifters, the Robin DiAngelos of the world, I understand them because they have this scam they're running, and they make a lot of money on it, and they have a lot of power and influence that they get from it. So I get that. I get the concept of that. What's more confusing to me are the people that go to them, the people that buy the books, they go to the seminars. You know, we had our race to dinner scene where Syra Rao and Regina Jackson sit down at dinner with a bunch of white women and call them racist for 2 hours. And the white women pay for the privilege of being insulted for 2 hours. Very real thing. And I look at that, and I'm in the room with them. I'm like, what are you people doing here? What are you getting out of this? I mean, this is, I'm not even the one being insulted, and I am offended on your behalf. And so I thought a lot about that. Like, what about the people that are getting sucked into this? What, how, why? And I think that it comes down to the decline of religion. And I think that this stuff has become a replacement for religion for them. And in particular, you know, the DEI grifters of the world, they feed off of white guilt. And where does the white guilt come from? Well, I think it's kind of like an internal misreading that people are doing inside their own souls. Because we all have guilt, because we all do things that are wrong. We're all sinners in a fallen world. And so you feel guilty when you do something wrong. You should. But if you're a member if you have faith, if you're a member of let's say a traditional religion, well, there's something to do with that guilt. Like you feel that you've committed a sin of some kind, and then there's a framework for understanding that and something to do with it. You don't have to just sit and wallow in it. In fact, you shouldn't. Well, if you don't have that framework, you don't have that religious framework, and you feel this guilt, well, you don't understand why you even feel guilty. Like where's that coming from? And yet you still feel it. And so these, you know, left-wing race hustlers come along and they say, okay, well, I'll tell you why you feel that way. It's because you're white. And this is all racial. And here's what you can do to atone for those sins. And then they do all those things. And then they're told, oh, by the way, thanks for doing that. Thanks for your money. You're still just as racist as you were before. But continue on doing the work, as they say, to just continually atone for this thing that you can't atone for. So I think that's what it is, that a lot of the women at the table, if they had faith, if they were going to church, like a real church instead of this, then they wouldn't be there. They would see it for the absurdity that it is. They would see that, yeah, I'm a sinner and I need Christ, but I don't need these freaking people. I don't need Syra Rao and Robin DiAngelo. They got nothing for me. But they don't see that because they don't have the faith.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of human nature, in addition to the other attributes you mentioned, which are not all that positive, that we look for community. And not finding that and other things in organized religion means that, I mean, automatically over time for a society, really negative things are going to happen for that society and for individuals. One of the things we see in DC is, and it's not everyone, thankfully, but with this decline in religiosity, is that politics replaces religion as sort of a quasi-religion. And that, of course, then generates all kinds of bad consequences, not the least of which is this short-term thinking. I say that to reiterate the point, not to say that elections are unimportant, but that those of us on the political right who ought, by our nature and our philosophy, to be institutionalists, ought to have a longer-term thinking. That leads me to this question. What do you do if you're a parent and you realize that the institutions your kids are interacting with, K through 12 schools, Boy Scouts of America, which was instrumental for me growing up, but we disallowed our son from remaining in for reasons that are probably pretty obvious. What do you do about confronting the institutional capture by the left of these organizations that would allow us to transmit values, whether overtly religious or not, from one generation to the next?
Yeah, that's a tough one that I struggle with a lot as a parent. And I think one of the answers is, well, you have to figure out which institutions are salvageable and kind of give up on the ones that aren't, or do what you can to protect your kids from them. So, for example, the public school system, in my view, is not a salvageable institution. It is, and if you're sending your kids into that system, and I know that some parents have to, they have no choice, and I totally understand that. But if you have any option, don't send your kid in to the public school system, because it can't be saved, not anytime soon. And if it can be, you can't send your kid in to be the one who saves it, because he can't, and that's asking too much of your kid. I think it's just sending your child into an environment that is going to be aggressively hostile to the values you've instilled in him. And he's going to be in that environment for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 months a year, for 12 or 13 years of his formative years. I mean, that's just, almost nobody can withstand that. Most adults can't withstand that kind of pressure. And the idea that like an 8-year-old can, I think, is absurd. So those institutions we have to, frankly, abandon, and you find replacements for them. And homeschooling, I mean, there are some private schools that are still good. Homeschool co-ops, I mean, there are other ways, smaller scale, local ways to avoid these institutions. But then there are others that maybe can be salvaged and saved, and that's going to involve like people like us getting involved in those institutions. I mean, you mentioned the Boy Scouts. Maybe Boy Scouts have certainly gone woke. Do we have to give up on it? I mean, is that one that could be pulled back from the brink? I think maybe it could be. But that would involve a lot of just good men getting involved in Boy Scouts and pulling it back from the woke insanity that it's fallen into. So I think it could go either way, but it's not the same answer for every institution.
Yeah, and it goes back to your point about speaking up. And if there's a series of people speaking up and that institution is not turning around, that might be one that's not salvageable. We'll wrap up here with a question or two about the film. What was it like to be at the DNC?
It was, well, they weren't happy to have me there. I found out. I wasn't expecting that. I thought they'd roll out the red carpet for me. You know, that was really, it was fortuitous timing because we had our movie coming out, and then we realized, well, of course, the DNC is happening also, and we have to use this to market our movie. I mean, how can we not troll the DNC? It's like, it almost is a moral obligation that I felt to do it. And what we found is that, because we spent too much time talking about, because this is what my job is now. I sit around with other grown adults brainstorming ways to troll people.
It's quite an industry.
Yeah, it's very, very serious meetings where we're doing this. But anyway, we spent a lot of time talking about, like, what can we do at the DNC? And it was interesting that what we found out is I really didn't have to do anything. I just had to show up and walk around, and that was enough. And just my mere presence was enough to upset these people. And we found that it's actually funnier because we had a couple like stunts we thought about doing, you know, slightly over the line, perhaps. We thought about borrowing, we have the reparations in our film where Robin DiAngelo pays reparations to my black producer on my insistence. We thought about going down to the floor of the DNC with my black producer and a bucket that says reparations and trying to collect reparations on the floor of the DNC, which I kind of wish we had done. But
I do too, actually.
but what we discovered is that we didn't, because all I did was show up and they were already mad. And it's funnier, actually, that I did nothing at all and I was just there and they got angry. That to me was even funnier. So, yeah, I enjoyed it.
Last question is a bit unfair because you're just days into your film being out, but anything on the horizon in terms of big cultural, social issues that you think that, given this art form you have perfected, and it is an art form, you might be tempted to poke at down the road?
Yes, but I absolutely will not say them.
That's what I figured your response would be. Well played. Well, Matt Walsh, I mean this genuinely on behalf of all of us at Heritage. I know you don't exist for this kind of credit or celebration. Thanks for your courage. Thanks for your sarcasm. Thanks for your humor, and thanks for being a great American. God bless you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.